Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Julie Collins. She is a cardiovascular perfusionist. She wrote the KevinMD article, Support Desperate Healthcare Workers Now Before Your Life Counts on Them. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's an honor to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you're at today?
Sure. Like everybody that tends to want to do something in healthcare, I didn't know exactly what direction I wanted to go in. My grandfather passed away of a massive heart attack, and my father had had heart surgery. So I knew from a young age that I wanted to do something in healthcare. So I got a bachelor's of biology from La Crosse, and then I went to perfusion school at MSOE after learning about the field of cardiovascular perfusion and what an impact I could make. When I graduated from perfusion school, I went and worked on the East Coast for 5 years, and then ultimately wound up coming back to Chicago. And I've been in Chicago for 10 years. I've been a perfusionist for 15 years, and 4 or 5 of those years, I've been the program director of the perfusion school at Rush, still working in the operating room and in the ICUs, taking care of patients as a perfusionist.
So I've done almost 700 of these episodes, almost 2 years of shows. I don't think I've had a cardiovascular perfusionist on the show. So for those audience members who aren't familiar with what you do, just to describe what a perfusionist is, walk us through a typical day of what you do and see.
Sure. So cardiovascular perfusionists work primarily in the operating room, and they help the surgeon provide a motionless bloodless field for the surgeon to operate on during open heart procedures. The patient's blood drains into our reservoir. We oxygenate and we act like their heart and lungs during the procedure, and we assist the surgeon with taking care of the patient. We also run a life support device called ECMO that's seen in the ICUs and has been well known and kind of enhanced during COVID, taking care of these patients that don't have any other options. So we act like those patients' lungs to try to give their lungs a chance to recover.
So share with my audience, what are some of the challenges and rewards of what you do?
Sure. And so the patients, when they come into the operating room, they introduce the nurses, they introduce the anesthesiologists and the surgeons, and oftentimes we're just the person in the corner with this machine that's going to keep you alive. And so one of the things that I enjoy is that every patient responds differently to the procedure, and when you're on bypass, they all respond differently. So even if you do a cabbage case every single day, your patient's going to react differently. And so we have the opportunity to be a silent person taking care of those patients. So they won't know who we are, they won't know that we probably exist or that we kept them alive during the surgery, but we're able to make a huge difference in their lives. And so every patient that we see is like our mother, our brother, our father, our grandfather. We take care of them like they were our own patients or our own family members. And so it's an opportunity to silently take care of somebody.
All right, so let's transition into your KevinMD article. It's titled Support Desperate Healthcare Workers Now Before Your Life Counts on Them. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure. So I'm the program director of the perfusion school, so I just work per diem, sitting ECMO patients and also working in the operating room. And after one shift, sitting ECMO in the morning and talking to some of my colleagues, I was particularly struck because although we'd had 2 other waves of COVID, this 3rd wave of COVID with Omicron was different. My healthcare worker friends were just overwhelmingly exhausted and too tired to say what they needed to say. And so in that day alone, I spoke to one of my friends who had just got off doing a night shift. And he said he was laying in the call room in bed and a code went off, and it wasn't his patient, but he knew that the nurses could have needed help. And he was too tired and exhausted, so he rolled over and went back to bed because he didn't have the energy to do that and take care of his own patients. And then as I was walking out of the hospital that day, I spoke with another perfusionist friend, and he had said that he had just put a 3-year-old patient with a cardiomyopathy on ECMO that was post-COVID because the heart was failing from COVID. And so he had called his wife to have his wife take their child to go and get vaccinated. And then I just got done talking to another friend who said, I just can't keep watching these people die day after day. I just can't do this anymore. And it made me think about the 2 years or so that all of us have been, doing some sort of self-quarantine from our families, taking our clothes up in the backyard, following ourselves through our house with a can of Lysol, showering in the basement so that we didn't touch anything in our house to not spread COVID to our families. And for me personally, my 7-year-old son, I spent 2 years listening to him probably every month coming to me saying, Mama, you're not going to die, are you? And so it's just the fatigue and the exhaustion from hearing all of these things as healthcare professionals that are trying to fight against COVID were just overwhelming that day. So I sat down with my computer and I wrote this piece that you published.
So from your lens as a perfusionist over the last two plus years during COVID,
Mhm.
walk us through some of the most difficult days and when your child was asking you whether you're going to die or not. What was going through your mind?
Sure. I mean, of course, you tell them, no, everything's going to be okay. Mama's going to take good care of herself. Everything will be okay. But in the back of your head, you're wondering because the patients that you're taking care of, are the same age as you and they're dying. And you're the one that's, holding up an iPad tablet so their family
Mm.
members can say their final goodbyes. And you're the one holding their hand when they're dying. And you're the one that ultimately is clamping the line for their life support device that is, leading to them passing away. So it's definitely a struggle. Some of the most significant stories, there was a woman that was on for a very long time, and she was my age. And I spent a lot of time talking to her when I was picking up extra shifts.
Mhm.
And it was just such a relief when she was able to finally leave the hospital. But there was a couple of nights where like she coded and we wound up having to do some things to get her back. And, I didn't know if she was going to make it. And there's a pair of two younger people that were teenagers that were both in the hospital. And one of the younger teenagers survived and made it out of the hospital, and the other one didn't. And all of these patients become like your family, and we take care of them from weeks to months. And so losing any of these patients is just heartbreaking for all of our perfusionist faculty and for the nurses and doctors that take care of them.
So after you have an outcome that was unexpected or an adverse outcome from COVID, what did you do immediately after to debrief, decompress? What happened immediately after those unfortunate, unexpected results?
I mean, to be honest, when you remove support from somebody, usually there's another patient that needs the machine. So you're cleaning the machine, you're getting it ready, and you're putting it on a new patient to give them a chance to survive. And then at the end of the night, when you get home, you think about it, you debrief with some of your friends, cry a little bit, and you realize that that next patient needs you as much as the one that just passed away did.
Now, in an ideal world, what should have been done in terms of being able to debrief and sorting through these difficult emotions? Is there anything that you wish could have been done further to help you with those feelings?
I mean, I think the biggest struggle is that patients were dying so rapidly. You would go into the hospital and you would hope that nobody would die and that your shift would go well, but inevitably, more times than not, somebody would pass away or somebody would have an adverse event happen that would, maybe they would have a stroke, or you'd have to take them to the operating room, or they would code and you'd try to get them back, or they would desat to like a crazy low level. And that was just kind of your routine life. So I wish there would have been more time in between each of these events for you to kind of
Hmm.
process what had happened, but really it was just happening so rapidly that there wasn't time to process or debrief properly.
Now, as you reflect over the last few years, and hopefully now things are better than they were, especially during Omicron, how did the last 2 years, how did they change you as a perfusionist?
I mean, I think it's made you rely more on your coworkers because
Hmm.
a lot of times you weren't able to, some of my coworkers quarantine themselves from their families. So you depend more on the people that you work with to do that debriefing and to help you through things that you're struggling with. And when you're frustrated or angry or mad or upset, those are the people that you talk to. So I think perfusion in general is a small profession. There's only 5,200 perfusionists in the United States. I think it just brought us closer together, as a group.
We're talking to Julie Collins. She's a cardiovascular perfusionist. She wrote the KevinMD article, Support Desperate Healthcare Workers Now Before Your Life Counts on Them. Julie, God forbid that there's another wave of the pandemic and hopefully things won't get any worse. But now that you've experienced the worst of the pandemic through Omicron, how are you better prepared to face future pandemics?
Sure. I think we've all learned a number of lessons. We've learned that, it takes time to figure out how to treat these patients more effectively. And, if something is happening, having enough supplies so that you can actually take care of these patients. So having enough PPE and having enough oxygenators and enough equipment to build circuits, I think it's something that would come to our mind quicker to make sure that we're prepared to handle the amount of patients that we would need to take care of. And I would say also just knowing that we have to be resilient and that it will mean more work for all of us. We might be doing jobs that are not the jobs that we were assigned to do. So you might be the janitor, you might be the person stocking the carts, but just being able to do whatever we need to do.
If you were to do this all over again, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I don't think there really is a way that you could have prepared for it any differently. And if I was to do this again, I guess I would just be more mentally prepared for what I was up against and how to manage taking time for myself, making sure that I was debriefing properly, talking to people when I began to get frustrated with something as opposed to, waiting and Also, maybe I'd have a better way to explain to my son, what was happening and, that he was going to be okay and the things that I was doing to make sure that he was okay.
And any piece of advice that you could share with perhaps new perfusionists who haven't gone through what you went through?
And so in the perfusion school, in my role as the program director, I've been sending the students out on rotation so that they can get more exposure to ECMO. And we've also been having more ethical discussions on ECMO patients in the classroom. And so my way of preparing them is to have some of these discussions about things that could happen to patients that you're taking care of so that we can kind of debrief on a kind of made up situation before they ever have to deal with, facing that when they're an active working perfusionist.
And when it comes to ECMO, what were some of those ethical decisions with ECMO during the pandemic that you brought up with these students?
One of the things that we struggled with was you put a patient on and they're not getting better and they're not getting worse yet, but they've been on for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. And how long do you keep that patient on when their lungs aren't recovering? If they're not a transplant candidate, they're not getting better. When you have another patient that's, waiting for a chance at ECMO and there's not enough equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So how long do you keep somebody on when they're not recovering? When you know that there's somebody else that could recover, that you could place that ECMO circuit on if you would choose support on that patient. So when is the time to withdraw? It's one ethical issue. And then, we talk about patient decisions and family members' decisions. So another ethical issue is we had one patient that was their lungs were the best looking lungs on the unit,
Mm-hmm.
but they realized, and they were completely with it, that, when if they recovered, they wouldn't have the same quality of life that they had before they were put on ECMO for COVID. And they decided that they were done. They didn't want to be on life support anymore. And we withdrew support after the family agreed and the patient agreed. But it was heart wrenching for us because they had the best chance of everybody we had on the unit. And they were the one that we withdrew support on. So those are two ethical issues we would discuss.
So walk us through the path in terms of how those ethical decisions were assessed from your experience.
Sure. I mean, with the patient that decided to withdraw support and that he was done, of course, there was numerous discussions with the surgeons and with the family to look at outcomes and prognosis and, how he was improving and if he was going to improve and what that looked like. And after you educate the patient, you educate the family and you look at all of the information that you have, it's ultimately that patient's decision. So with the students, it was just walking through what pieces of information you have and what the steps are before that patient makes that decision.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Yes, one of the biggest things is we've seen that patients that are vaccinated don't usually wind up on ECMO, and patients that are not vaccinated are the ones that we see the most of. And so I guess just keeping politics out of it, keeping, concerns at a bay where you look at the actual information that's being presented and you make an educated decision, because we wouldn't have seen a lot of these patients if they were vaccinated. So that I know is a personal choice, but just looking at all of the information and not looking at just one source when you're making that decision. And then realizing that if you're not feeling well and you're starting to decompensate, coming to the hospital sooner rather than later will increase your chance of having a better outcome. And realizing that healthcare workers are doing the best that they possibly can and that we're exhausted. We've been working extra shifts. We've been dealing with patients dying on us for 2.5 years now. We've had people resign, we've had people leave. So just having a little bit of compassion for those people that are taking care of you.
Julie, thank you so much for sharing your stories, time, and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it.